on YouTube. Okay. All right. So to summarize, and feel free to correct me. Um,
Perfect.
you were inquiring about a greenfield project
Mm-hmm.
and assembling, for lack of a better term, the resources or the thoughts that are going to drive this project to delivery. And so on your tweet, you were asking about the 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 testing architecture or test automation architecture.
Yeah.
But then I said, okay, um, but it sounds like your initial questions on the video, as on a conference call, was like, what can I do to mitigate risk for this project? And so I was the first thing that just came to mind was Javal Lowy's writing software, spelled RIGHTING
Mm-hmm.
base software. And if your time is limited, then I recommend reading the second half of that book, which is about project design. So usually we think about software design, we think about architecture, but project design is essentially, um, and I don't really do the book justice, but what I captured from the book is identifying the options that are available for delivering the project. With those options, they're analogous to strategies, and every strategy has a list of advantages and disadvantages, and it would
Okay.
be up to the architect or the CTO or the lead developer to present those options, to stakeholders, maybe to the CEO, the founder, whoever is in charge of giving or providing their blessings. And as long as they're informed on both the advantages as well as the consequences, then what they pick is their decision. Here's the thing: is we got to be just like the United States government, right? We give them an illusion of we're giving them choices, but really you're constraining their options to what you're willing to deliver to them. So it's usually between 2 to 4 different options. Usually, for me, it's 3 options that I'm
Okay.
okay with doing, but those are the options that they get tunnel vision on, in which when you get them to have tunnel vision on 3 options in which they're measuring the advantages and disadvantages per option, then and these are the options that you select, then you win,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so
Right.
it's a psychological battle as well as a technical battle. Um, so, and also when you're designing the project, not only are you identifying the options with the trade-offs for each option, but you're also identifying, okay, if you were to take option one, then what work can be done in parallel? What work can be done in series?
Yeah.
Meaning that do you really have to have a team of 5 developers all allocated at one time, or can we plan this a little better in which, well, for the first maybe uh, 2 to 3 weeks, we just need the architect or the lead developer to establish their vision by laying down the foundation of the code base. Here's the libraries that this code base is going to be composed of, and this is the vision that I see. And then you may have a proof of concept with some implementing some wireframes and demonstrating the navigation. So those wireframes can just be skeleton pages, but you're demonstrating the navigation of the application shell. So feel
Okay. That's
cut me off whenever, man. This is a
okay.
free
Perfect.
flowing conversation.
All right. So let's see if I get it right. So what we've been talking about is system software design is one aspect of project management. There's also designing the project, and the book that you've been recommending to me, which is Writing Software, shows me on the second half of the book how can I design the project in
Yes.
a way that I can select which options would make more sense. When I select them, I go to my main stakeholders, present them how the project would work with different options that makes more sense to me. knowing fully well what are the trade-offs for each option and how it would balance the project out and deliver deliver the product at the end and and reduce the work that we'd have to do over time, even though we have to build the project at first and then we have to maintain it and make sure that the work that we do is fully optimized. So knowing those options pretty well and balancing them out.
Right.
So yeah, that answers part of my question because that's something I'm not fully versed into, and I think reading that book would be super helpful.
There's videos on it too. So a precursor could just be watching Javal Lowy's videos on writing software, spelled with the RIGHTING, or
Perfect.
just project design, and you could just throw in Javal Lowy. His YouTube channel, and I could throw you a link on your Twitter DM. Is
Excellent.
I thought it's called iDesign.tv or something like that. But I'll provide you some additional links.
Thank you very much appreciated. Okay, so that covers project management. What about how do you pick your testing architecture? Because there are many different layers to testing. So from my perspective, like I've been introduced to property testing a few days ago. Okay.
This is an unpopular opinion of mine. Most people disagree with me. But I think that you should have influence over the team that's being assembled. Like, I really don't like when someone else assembles the team and then they hold you accountable for delivering the project. So I'm not sure what your situation is, and you don't have to feel obligated to articulate your situation. But I will say that all this is about reducing risk, right? So the whole purpose of testing, regardless of if it's software testing, it doesn't matter. It could be testing a rocket launch, a Raptor engine. It doesn't matter. The whole point of testing is to reduce risk.
Yeah.
One of the biggest issues with technical projects is they become too hard to maintain, and it's too hard to reason with the code base, right? And
Right.
so I'm not sure what paradigm you guys are using, whether it's predominantly object oriented or if it's leveraging functional programming. But if you're going to build something that's moderately complex, then you probably need to build something that is moderately testable.
Exactly.
And I have never ever heard of developers that are not skilled in writing automated tests or engineering automated tests that can write a testable code base.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. It doesn't. And so whatever that means to you, I just, maybe you already took it into consideration. But if you hired a whole bunch of developers that are cowboys and they're considered senior, yet they still don't know how to write a basic unit test, I think that's a red flag, and it needs to be brought to people's attention. And if they want you to carry on with those members of the team, all right, but that's a disclaimer that you don't have a testable code base if you don't have developers that know how to write testable code.
Which would make sense. Yeah. On that front, the people on my team know how to write tests.
Okay.
For us, it was more for me because I started thinking about it. How do I pick the proper layer? So from my perspective, unit testing was more to avoid regression. So a bug comes up, you fix it, you add a quick unit test to make sure that bug will never appear again, or at least it'll be caught quick and early. I've been introduced to property testing, which could be really helpful to design like my spec requirement test, my acceptance criteria, expecting this. And side note, we're usually deeply into OO and object-oriented code, but for this, we're really thinking of using F# and Safe to build a web project. So from that front, it would be more shifting from object-oriented programming to functional programming.
Okay.
That also would add a lot of benefits to the project.
Okay.
And the rest is more for testing. The rest is more, I don't know. There are things that I know about, I've heard about, but I've never really used, like end-to-end testing on the front in the web space. I never really did that, and that's something else for me to learn. But something that you mentioned over Twitter was that you're not prone to use UI test tools because they're brittle, and if your UX changes over time, that makes it harder on your side. So I was wondering, when you sent this to me a few hours ago, how would you approach testing your UI, making sure it remains consistent over time and it still looks good as you expect it to look?
Okay. Where do I start? So, if you're going the FP approach,
Mhm.
translated functional programming approach, then you want to consider if your team has the skill set for domain modeling. Are you familiar with domain modeling?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
familiar with it, and I also read the book from Scott Walshing about functional domain modeling, which was pretty good.
Okay. The whole notion of leaning on the compiler to reduce the number of illegal states that can be present
Yeah.
at runtime reduces, well, the number of tests that you have to write.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're building a shopping cart, you can't check out an empty shopping cart, right?
Yeah.
You can only check out a shopping cart that has items, right? And so when you're that stringent or detailed with your type system, it just removes a significant amount of effort that you would normally have to unit test for.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah.
So after leaning on the compiler as the first stage via domain modeling exercise, which usually when I'm doing domain modeling, are you familiar with like domain driven design just in general?
Yeah, a little bit.
And identifying the boundaries and exposing the bounded context. Once you achieve that, then you can start establishing a rich type system to enforce. I mean, I know people will hear it a lot, but somewhat enforce illegal states being unrepresentable, at least to the best of your ability, without it being a major maintenance issue. So that was the first stage, just lean on the compiler for enforcing business rules. The second part is, and this is very contrary to mainstream development practices, but there's really two things that are very unpopular. One is, I sincerely believe, especially if you take into consideration Conway's law, giving developers ownership of the modules of the system, right? I think there's some advantages with that. A lot of people will argue that's contrary to the spirit of Agile. Okay. However, the advantage is when people own something, then they're usually held accountable for it, and there's not really other people that they can blame. And so when you have a team that own individual modules of the system that they're held responsible for, one is, I think it increases the likelihood of those modules being loosely coupled from one another. Two, if their implementation of that module isn't maintainable over time, then instead of rewriting the whole system, you just rewrite their module.
Exactly. Yeah.
And like I said, based on Conway's law, or maybe somewhat related to Conway's law, you assign module ownership. These modules are more than are more than likely to be loosely coupled, right? Which
Right.
some could argue would be more maintainable than if it were tightly coupled. So I discussed organizational boundaries somewhat, or accountability. The the other part is, and this is also contrary to mainstream, is single responsibility principle isn't just about classes, right?
Right.
I think it's about individual responsibilities of the components of the application, right? So
Yes.
a lot
Right.
of people start off with this monolith, and this monolith will have a views folder, a controllers folder, and a
Mm-hmm.
repositories folder. And here's the issue, or the gotcha. I sincerely believe that the reason why a lot of these monoliths don't have backing automated tests is because when you have a single monolithic library, your your test library is now required to acknowledge every single dependency of that monolith. All third-party dependencies, frameworks, everything, right? If you just take the time to plan or to strategize how you're going to reduce the risk for delivering this project or this solution, then you know isolate the one way is the functional areas of,
Mm-hmm.
of the application. In the book Writing Software, they say no, don't do functional, at least from like a distributed architecture point of view. Um, but I think functional is fine when you're just doing an application and you're not doing the entire enterprise. Um, the book suggests doing volatility based decomposition,
Which
which
means
volatility based decomposition is identifying uh, the areas that could change,
okay.
but shouldn't change the actual behavior of the functionality. So, for example, in the let's say the 1980s, when you would write a trading system, if trading systems were even written, maybe telecommunications type, uh, you would probably write it in which you believe that the client to that system would be a human being on the phone or some person typing in a order. Over time, that has changed to there's no longer a person on the phone that's making trades. Some people are using an application like a piece of software, but other clients to the same system are algorithms that are running in refrigerated rooms that are owned by I don't know, I can't think of any major bank, Chase Bank or Bank of America or whatever. So
Okay.
with volatility based decomposition, I'm sure I'm butchering that term.
That's fine.
You're basically grouping code that is possible to change, but you're making it abstract enough to not care about the who or
The
the
what?
yeah.
Okay, now pretty much it's basically like making sure your code can work but is loosely coupled in a sense. Like, or you would just inject dependencies through interfaces or like abstract classes
Yeah, I
and just
can't.
say, well, just play with this and we'll see where it go. As long as I depend on that interface, how that interface is implemented, I don't care. As long as I get that dependency.
Yeah, the thing is more. I think it's more applicable towards enterprise uh, architectural approach, where you're identifying what you can streamline so that you're not having these cascading ripple effects throughout your entire enterprise. So you're grouping different things together into components that you may not observe out in mainstream, because in mainstream we decompose based on functional components. But I think for an application like a web application
Yeah.
or a mobile app, I think functional is still fine. It's when you're dealing with the distributed services in which some repos sit over here and other repos sit over here. That's where like you really have to take into consideration how you're going to really architect that stuff to minimize maintenance issues or maintenance cost. So I feel like I'm going off on a tangent right now.
No, it's good. That's a lot of info that I wasn't broken into, and that's good to know.
Okay.
In my situation, it's gonna be a single repo, and I think if it would have been OO or FP, I don't think the choice in patterns would affect the way the project would be delivered, but I think F sharp and safe would be strong contenders for the project.
Okay. In regards to testing, my personal experience, which with emphasis is my personal experience, I really just don't trust UI tests. Um, I think that they might be great for like smoke tests where there's a new build out and you just make sure that you can navigate to all the different major components of the application,
Mhm.
and that's it. But I just think that with today's tooling, at least the tooling that I'm aware of, it just doesn't justify the cost of maintenance. Um, that might also just be my inexperience, but I mean, I started in software testing and QA in my career, and I still have a deep passion for it. I just make more money just calling myself a software developer instead.
Okay, I see.
Um, what else? Something that I said that I think has value
Hmm. Sure, go on.
is you have different type of environments.
QA prod dev, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I like to I like to build my applications that don't depend on the internet. Meaning that I could have different different data sources feeding my application, and my application can still operate without it being connected to a web server or a database server. And so those watermarks that I place on the landing page,
Hmm.
it makes it blatantly obvious what configuration my application is in just by looking at the application itself and not having to dig into code to figure out if I'm pointing to QA, if I'm pointing to my dev environment,
Oh my God,
if the data that I'm looking at is coming from an actual database or is it coming from my test API.
I
Um,
see. So that's how you do things. So I'm guessing your main workflows are actually pure functions, and you are calling those pure functions into your routes. So you have your web functionality from that place, and when you test and you create your test APIs, you're not creating the logic. You're not testing around the logic of your web server. You're testing the logic around your business workflows. That's how you keep them separate.
yep. So during the bootstrapping process of the application, it figures out which environment or which mode the application needs to run in,
Okay.
and it just gets this data, or actually, it really receives an instance of an API. So, like in my case, I'll have my API might be called a mock API,
Yeah.
for when I'm offline, right? But and it will point to all these operations that I mocked out, in my test API library whenever the user submits a request and that request hits the controller or the view model, and then it will, based on the API that I inject into that controller or that view model, it's either going to hit my test API functions or it's going to hit my data gateway functions. And that's the way it works out. Feel free to keep guiding me because I'll just keep doing the brain dump.
No, this is good. Do you have pages or blog posts or articles that you're aware of that discuss how to approach these things, like finding a watermark, decoupling from the internet, and making sure your test APIs are sound and proof?
No, but I did go over this with a Twitch streamer, but I think that video expired because I think the lifetime of those videos are like 6 days, and I had 2 good sessions, and he kind of asked the same thing. But I like to hijack people's Twitch streams, and we were going over this in detail. The short answer is no. I haven't blogged about it. I don't have any. I don't have any videos on it either. That's the short answer.
Okay, no,
I know it's going to take
okay.
time for me to prepare, and I kind of like it. I'm trying to build a startup outside of my gainfully employed project, and so it's kind of like a conflict of interest.
I fully understand what you're going through.
But I enjoy discussing it, and usually if someone thinks they have a mental model, like this one Twitch streamer did, he would scribble on Microsoft Paint what he believes he's hearing from me, and then we make adjustments to his drawing until it makes sense.
Oh, that's actually really great. So you'd be open to these kinds of, if someone comes up to you on something piques your interest, and our interests are aligned, we come to you, we send you let's say a message on Twitter, and we say, can we reach out, and we do a Twitch video and we record it, or we can do it like we're doing here and record it on YouTube so it stays longer than only 6 days.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm not getting paid for it, I prefer for that information to be free for others to be able to access.
Excellent.
What else? I'm going Scatterbrain right now. Something that I said was not a mainstream practice, but I think there's value in it, is identifying the components of a system. And my belief system is those components have a higher probability of succeeding when they're built in isolation of the application and tested thoroughly and then assembled or integrated. I think mainstream practices is more of an iterative approach where Scrum Master or whoever or the lead arbitrarily assigns tasks out to developers, and they don't care about the strengths of the developers. They don't care about the areas of the software that the developer is
working on,
is very intimate with. They just arbitrarily, oh, you're a body, here's a task, right? And I think that's the reason why you get effed up code bases a lot, because whenever you have developers that are somewhat interchangeable, you kind of lose the vision of that particular component of the system. And components require design too, right? A component can have its own architecture, but when you just miscellaneously, I don't know if miscellaneously is a word, but when you just arbitrarily assign tasks to different people and expect them to jump in and jump out, I think that reduces the likelihood of having a strong design that's implemented to meet the vision of whoever intended it, right?
Right.
In practice, I'm sure that it requires practice, but that's the thing, is no one, like with a 98% probability, is going to deliver a good solution if they've never practiced it before, right? You're not going to deliver a good component if you never practiced it before. It's all about paradigm. It's all about like building muscle memory. So
Right.
I know I'm going off on
So
a tangent, but
so what you'd say is, let's say your mobile application or your web application has like 5 different workflows and features. Instead of assigning 5 devs to 5 different workflows that they each work on, and at some point iteratively you integrate them and trying to see if they work and they have their own tests. You do work for one, do it well from top to bottom. When feature one is done, then you move to feature two, and et cetera, until you meet feature N. And when it's all said and done, then you move to integrating them together. So you have your tests, you know they all work. When they're separated, how would they work if now we put them all together in the same platform?
yeah, that's not what I meant.
Oh,
So
okay, then I misunderstood you.
yeah, and this stuff can be captured in the project design, right? When you're identifying the options and what work can be done in parallel between developers versus what work must be done in series, where this component is done, now this component has to be implemented afterwards, right? And maybe component's the wrong
Right.
word.
Okay, I see.
So based on the way that I've been doing things, there's a couple of things, and I think this might be valuable for you, or it might get you in trouble. Is the business? They're like little toddlers. They all they see is visual. Software is visual to them. All they see
Right.
is the shell, right? So you can have a Pinto, but if it's encased in a Maserati or a Ferrari, they think you're awesome, right? But they don't understand how crappy it is behind the scenes, how crappy the plumbing is, how hacked together things are.
Right.
Uh, and so in life, with a lot of things, people, women, whatever, you just have to acknowledge the system instead of trying to fight it. And so I say all this because I think it's in people's interest, and I try to practice this, that
Okay.
every single day you have to demonstrate new value that was delivered. Not I was working on XYZ yesterday. Today I'm going to be working on blah blah blah. No impediments. No, f that. In order to like manage expectations and gradually uh, earn more and more trust from the stakeholders, I think you have to show them something that you completed, with emphasis on show them, demonstrate to them. So I usually, and this is kind of going towards your question, right? I'm just attacking it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Is you can go ahead and demonstrate value one morning by during the status meeting sharing your desktop, showing the application, and just showing the shell navigation, right? Nothing, there's no logic
Right.
really in there, right? You just have user clicks this button, this page displays, there's 2 panels on this page. Who cares what's inside those panels? The user can do some work within these panels, and then they click the next button. Next button transitions to this page over here, right? That's all they want to see is progress.
Right. That's yeah.
You can fill in the details later, right? When it comes to the component part of it, right? The component part is completely separate from the application's shell behavior or
Right.
navigation. So the component can be implemented, and maybe it takes a week or a couple weeks. But then you can just, man, this is going to go really deep. You,
So I like it. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. You can just when that component becomes done, you could just plug it into the system, and it was already tested in isolation outside of the system, and it should just work, right? And it shouldn't
Right.
prevent anybody else from doing their work, um, which is another thing because there's data that should just be mocked out for now until components are ready to integrate into the system. So your system is initially nothing but mocked out data,
Right.
if it has any data at all, and it gradually receives integration pieces
Right.
over time, which leads me to something else, which is very unpopular.
Go ahead. What is it?
I don't believe in feature branches.
You don't believe in feature branches. So
Nope.
see here that all my career I've been doing that. So if you're not doing feature branches, are you saying that you do all your work on a single branch and you just push on master?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Why?
feature toggles over feature branches. Are you familiar with feature toggles?
I've heard of the concept, but I'm not sure I fully remember the reason, the whys behind
Okay.
it.
AKA feature flags. So, yes, I'm all about trunk based development.
Okay.
The, the reason why is because trunk based development supports the spirit of continuous integration
Okay.
and small batches, right? And
Right.
so you have a team of developers. They're continuously checking in their code, and if something's not working, other developers are going to observe it and potentially swarm over that issue until it gets resolved. There is no working on a private branch, waiting until it's almost perfect, ignoring all the other opportunities to clean up technical debt that's not related to your feature, in which that gets compounded. And then you, after several days or after a couple weeks, you check in your code, and now you have to spend the next several hours or maybe even several days dealing with merge conflicts.
Oh my
It
God. Yeah.
it's counterproductive. It completely destroys the whole notion of continuously integrating small batches of code over time, and it promotes or exacerbates technical debt because people now are discouraged from cleaning up code that is obvious and quick to clean up, but it's going
Will
to be,
bring a lot of conflicts.
well, I was going to say it's going to become a distraction to whoever's reviewing the pull request
Yeah,
because
there's that
it's
too.
not a scope. And then you have overhead of articulating why this file or why this method was modified that has nothing to do with the feature or the bug fix, and it's just overhead and it's very unnecessary. And instead, with feature toggles, trunk based development, everybody's checking in code. Something happens, so what? We swarm over, figure out why it happened, fix it, because that thing happened literally within the past couple minutes, max half an hour, right?
Hmm. Right.
And so it's more easy to remember who introduced the issue, and for them to revert what they did or patch it. Feature flags also have the advantage of supporting a gradual deployment of value to customers. So
Oh, I
usually,
see.
so usually the way that mainstream releases features or bugs is big bang. That's it. Everybody gets it. And if
Yeah.
there's any issues with it, then everybody's disrupted. Everybody. That's the big bang release, right? Um, when you're doing feature toggles, you now have control to throttle the deployment of that software, the deployment of those features. You can gradually deploy those features or that bug fix to a sample of your client population.
Right.
And then you can look at I don't know, server resources or any type of statistics. That's another topic when we talk about DevOps practices and patterns of usage. And when you identify items that are deviating from expectations in regards to how users are using the software, you can review that over time. And when there's flags that are raised because people are no longer hitting this page, or they're no longer checking out as they used to based on the average number per day or per hour, then you can address that right then and there. And then once you address it, then you let the same users that have access to it continue to work with it. You see things are returning back to normal usage, and then you gradually deploy it wider and wider to more users.
Scott, I think I'm gonna have to end the meeting here.
Okay.
There's some people visiting my apartment right now. I don't want them to disrupt the video. So I'm really sorry. This has been really great. Thank you for all your time. I will review the material that you presented, and I think I will just chat up with you some other time.
Yeah, I'll send you a link.
Thank you very much.
Hey, take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.